Thank you for joining me here at the Real ResQ Podcast, where we are part of the Vertical Podcast Network known as Helicast. That's right, Vertical Magazine has put us all together on one platform. You can go to verticalhelicast.com to check out all of these amazing podcasts, including the Hangar Z, the Helicopter Podcast, Valor Flight Crew, and Vertical MRO Podcast. We've got a couple more in there, including alerts and tech talk. Go check it out today. Now, I'd like to say thank you to the sponsors of this episode. We've got Precision Aviation Group. Their precision is the key to your performance. Check them out at precisionaviationgroup.com. Axness. When lives are at stake and conditions are challenging, clear communication is of the utmost importance. Check them out at axness.com. Switlick Survival Products, a leader in safety and survival products. Check them out at switlick.com. Ready Bar, the only meal replacement bar designed for first responders. Go to getreadybar.com, get your box today, and make sure you enter the promo code RESQ10 for 10% off. And remember, if you want to help support this podcast, go get some swag at therealresqstore.com. Now let's dive into our next episode. We've got more stories coming from the U.S. Navy, and here are fun facts about our next guest. He is from New York, so forget about it. He commanded 2 squadrons during his Navy career. He has 4 children, and his youngest followed a bit of dad's footsteps and is a helicopter pilot in the Navy. Please welcome our next guest, retired Navy Captain, Mr. Wayne Tunick, call sign GT. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real ResQ Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Real ResQ Podcast. I have got another United States Navy guy with me. Hua? Is that right, Hua? Can I say that? Or is that another service?
Hua.
Hua.
That's okay. We'll take that. Yeah.
All right, I'll take it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Mr. Wayne Tunick, call sign, the Great Toontini, a.k.a. GT. And actually, all that came from the Great Santini, so I do want to hear that story because it's fantastic. You were a pilot and a retired captain from the U.S. Navy. In addition to this, you also wrote a book called The American Quest. How are you, sir?
Hey, great to be here, Quinny. I know I'm not Coast Guard, but we're close, on the Navy. Flew with a lot of Coast Guard guys. Did a lot of counter-narcotics ops. Got some stories about that I probably should tell, where we, were basically flying and we took the Coast Guard snipers on board, to go
Oh, yeah.
after the go fast, because when I first started, we couldn't take them out. So it's great to be here. I've listened to your stories about your rescues, your American hero,
Well,
and
thank you.
again, the 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 people out there, they don't know about the guys that are in the back that are jumping out of helicopters in the middle of the night in rough seas and doing amazing things. So
Well, thank you, sir.
I want to make sure that if there's a way to spread that word, I'd like to help do that.
Well, I appreciate that 100%. And for the record, I think at one point I was doing it for fun. I'm not sure where the fun turned into work, but it's all.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good. I appreciate you coming on as a U.S. Navy member. I've had a handful of U.S. Navy rescue swimmers on here, a couple U.S. Navy medics, but I love your stories and I love the fact that we get to highlight them here because you guys have a very interesting and unique dynamic with your air crewmen. Like there's some amazing rescues that have gone on, and like even downed aircrafts that come off carriers and stuff. And you guys are going in to get the pilots, and it's incredible to listen to. So I appreciate you joining me today for sure. Um, Let me ask you this: like, how and why did you join the U.S. Navy? What brought you to being a pilot?
Um, well, I went to college and it came time for me to graduate and figure out what I was going to do. And I was pretty convinced that I didn't want to sit behind a desk. And so I was actually had put in an application in to for Marine Corps aviation and then also for Navy SEALs. And I was waiting to hear back, and the Marine Corps took forever. And the Navy called me up and they said, "Hey, your test scores, you can go aviation if you want to go aviation."
Nice.
And yeah, my father was a World War II Navy pilot. And, I said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "Well, you know, if you're on the, if you're, flying, it's going to be a lot better than being a grunt on the ground." So I went through the aviation, went to AOCS. That was Aviation Officer Candidate School. That was 3 months down in Pensacola, and we had Marine drill instructors. So they taught us the way to do it right, which I think was a very important part of my background anyway. And then went to flight school, helicopters, and started in the H2. And I actually had a mishap, a crash in the H2, where the
No
aircraft was,
way.
yeah, the aircraft was destroyed, and then became an instructor in the 60 and CO of HSL 44 and then HSL 40, and went up to DC and actually handled all the helicopter development for the Navy. And then I went to the National Reconnaissance Office and ran all of the use of the satellites to support Navy, um, and retired from there.
Wow. What a how many years did you do?
So I was active duty for 27 years, and then I was a Navy civilian for 15.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah, yeah, those last 15 years was in the Pentagon, and I was in the Pentagon on 9/11
Oh, no
as well.
way.
Yeah. And we were on the the fifth floor. The plane came in underneath our area. It actually knocked me out of my seat. I saw the fireball come up because I had a window, and we actually were able to evacuate. We evacuated into the center courtyard, and we did try to help by going back, but it was just filled with smoke and everything. There wasn't much we could do. So yeah, that was one of those one of the bad days. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
That was not in the write up that you sent me. I did not know you were there for that. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. If you remember the picture of the Pentagon where the outer wall is falling down, there's a big American flag hanging. The that was the E ring, which is the outside ring. The next ring was the D ring, and my window is right there. Um, that's why I saw the fireball, because it had hit the E ring, and everything had come up. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. I am beyond ecstatic the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you right now after being through that. So well done,
I, I'm
sir. Like,
I'm ast- I'm ecstatic. I'm sitting here talking to you too after that.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I can totally understand the want to go back in and help guys and girls that were there that got hit and were in trouble for
yeah.
sure.
It was, uh, you know, the center courtyard of the Pentagon is, it's a grassy area, and they were bringing out some of the injured people, really bad injuries, and then we went back in. A number of us were out there together, and we went back in, and it was just because there was all that jet fuel that caused the fire, and it just caused enormous smoke. And even when we got to a place to try to go in, there was so much damage, with collapsing of the ceilings and everything. You couldn't even go in more than a foot or two. So there really wasn't a lot of rescue to be done at that point, because, you know, the people that were able to get out got out, and the people that needed help, were usually helped by those people. But there wasn't a lot of people. There wasn't a lot of people that could be helped afterward, because there was so much damage that those people were, not alive at that point. Yeah,
Yeah, my gosh.
yeah,
You're the first person I've ever talked to about the Pentagon side of 9/11. And I say that
yeah,
because I've talked to a few guys that were in New York, like on call or somewhere in the vicinity, that had to respond after the planes hit the trade towers. And but nobody I've talked to has been in the Pentagon. And it's interesting to me personally because I was in the honor guard in DC for my first unit. So I was in and on the Pentagon lawn at least once a week. Without exaggeration, I had friends of mine that were the Pentagon tour guides because they always had all the services that would take people through the Pentagon tour. Um, yeah, I always found it interesting, but you're the first person I've ever spoken to that had to that literally lived through it. My goodness.
yeah, yeah. In fact, the when we evacuated to the center courtyard, and I walked out there, there was it looked like a piece of aluminum, like honeycomb. It was probably about a foot long, and I picked it up. I wish I had kept it, but at that time when we evacuated, we didn't know a plane had hit the Pentagon. We had seen the plane hit the World Trade Center, and, you know, obviously we knew this was not going to be a good day, but then we got hit, and we originally thought that maybe it was a bomb, you know. But
Yeah.
we had no idea a plane had hit. When I picked up that piece of aluminum honeycomb, it was actually a part of that plane. It had, you know, essentially flown over the entire building into that area, and I just picked it up and I threw it back on the ground. I mean, again, I we didn't know what it was. I just
Yeah.
looked at it, and there was people coming out that were hurt, and it was very chaotic. I'm not even sure when I remember knowing that it was a plane. Probably later on that day. Um, but my wife, she's the one that had the hardest day, because on that day, um, she had heard on the radio that a plane had hit the Pentagon, and in the newer section, which is what I was in, and I couldn't speak to her. because all of the phone systems were overloaded. The cell phones were down. So it was a
Right.
good 4 hours before I was able to tell her that, hey, I'm okay. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it
Holy
was,
smoke.
yeah, it was not a good day. Um, and we're still fighting those assholes. So can you believe that? You know?
I- yes, sir.
Yeah,
I know it.
yeah, yeah. It's incredible, unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah, no doubt.
So yeah,
I was really not expecting us to have this side conversation to go into that. Thank you so much for bringing a little bit of insight to that. That's wow. Yeah, I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah, yeah. A lot of
Not what I
people got,
expected.
a lot of people killed that day, and I always on 9/11, I don't post a lot of stuff, on Facebook, but I always post what I wrote on, I think it was the 10-year anniversary, that, you know, it's very disturbing to me to watch the coverage that we have these days because if you notice and remember this when September comes up and you watch TV, we get we don't talk about who did it. Um, you know, it's not like Pearl Harbor with the Japanese, you know what I mean?
Right.
And as the time has gone on, it's the Pentagon was attacked, but they don't say by who. I mean, normal conversation would be the Pentagon was attacked by Islamic extremists, I mean, um, but we have kind of removed that, and it's kind of like, you know, unknown. I bet you if you ask half the kids, they don't even know who attacked the Pentagon. And I always say that I hope I live long enough to see the Marines get rid of the last Islamic extremists and send them up to paradise that they're always looking to go to. Um, but yeah, it's over time that has unfortunately, I think, been lost from the conversation due to whatever. But I don't think we should forget that, especially
Agreed.
now we're in the Red Sea fighting the same foe, same foe we've been fighting for 40 years. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well above my pay grade, sir.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We can only
Wow.
support our troops now. So,
Yes, sir.
uh, yeah. And
Which I try to
they're
do
out,
all the time.
they're out there right now, you know, they're fighting a war and, and unfortunately, again, people don't realize that, you know, these aircraft carriers and destroyers that are in the Red Sea off the coast, um, when they get a missile launched at them, they've got 3 seconds to decide what's going on. This is not
Right.
20 minutes. This is not they have 3 seconds, and that's why that aircraft was lost off the carrier because they were doing an evasive maneuver and they were moving an aircraft at the same time. And, you know, it's just a matter of physics that if you've got, you know, 30,000 pounds moving in one direction and the ship rolls to the other to avoid something, it's not going to be controllable. And luckily, the two guys that were moving it were able to jump out and they didn't get taken overboard. But again, it's we're fighting a war, and I'm not sure a lot of people understand that. You
Yeah.
know, and that's not just the Navy. Coast Guard is very engaged in the Gulf as well.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's one of the things that I actually really respect about like Coast Guard. They like as they're going out, they're attached to a Navy battle group and they help with all the aids to navigation, which is wonderful. Like
yeah.
it's great. So along with
Well,
other law enforcement and stuff that, yeah,
yeah,
there's a lot of
all
other
the
things
law
they, yeah.
enforcement has to be done by the Coast Guard because the Navy, we're not allowed to do law enforcement. And if we do it, we have to have a Coast Guard law enforcement debt on board the ship. And when the Navy does law enforcement, we actually strike up a Coast Guard flag and we
Yeah.
become under the Coast Guard control.
It's
Um,
so cool.
yeah, yeah,
Well, to me, it's cool because I'm a coastie, but
yeah. And
like,
we used
hey,
to do
watch this. I'm
that.
going to take over a Navy ship.
Yeah. And we would do that all the time I did a lot of counter-narcotics ops and, we would have the Coast Guard dead on board. And yeah, whenever we had to board a ship, we would go under, I think it was 7th Coast Guard District, which is in Miami, and basically we would be under their control, and because we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, it's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. I want to back up something real quick. First of all, actually, let me say this. Thank you for sharing your experience at the Pentagon. I am grateful that you're here to share that story, and uh, I'm thank you for the service. Thank you for being there. Yeah, thank you for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Switlick. No mission is the same. Why should your suit be? Introducing a new custom dry suit experience. Choose your fabric, colors, neck and wrist seals, zippers, pockets, collars, and so much more. Intelligent measuring prompts ensure the most tailored fit. Brought to you by Switlick Survival Products. For more information, visit us at www.switlick.com.
You mentioned you were in a crash that totaled the helicopter
Yeah. I was
and walked
flying the
away.
Yeah, I was flying the H2, um, which was it was notoriously a dangerous helicopter. In fact, it had one of the highest mishap rates in the Navy, especially in Vietnam. It was a single engine version. I flew the dual engine version, but I was actually the aircraft commander. We were at Mayport, and I was giving a pilot his first flight in the squadron, and we were starting up, and I thought I had heard a noise, and so I called maintenance and told them that. They said shut down, they'll send out a troubleshooter, and I shut down. And the troubleshooter, that was a mech, he went in the back and we started up and he was listening. And in those days, we didn't have the vibration analysis equipment that we have today. So, he didn't hear anything that was unusual. And so I said, okay, being a young aircraft commander, let's go. Um, that was a mistake because I knew something was not 100%, even though they said it was okay. I didn't want to, be the guy that canceled, and everything was okay. So I took the aircraft, and about 20 minutes later, we were actually in the landing pattern in at Mayport, and the other guy, it was his first flight in the squadron. He was flying, and we were in the landing pattern, and we heard a big bang. Um, and I took control. We were only at that point, about 250 feet. And so, you know, the our NR, which is the rotor speed, that was basically dropping. So the engines were running, but the NR was dropping. It was a very confusing situation for me as a pilot, but I knew that we were, you know, I was trying to do a half decent auto, from 200 feet, which is kind of low. I also had a building that was being built there that we had to get over. And so by the time that we were, you know, I was trying to finish the auto rotation, which is, our way of landing in an emergency without power.
Yeah.
Um, at about 60 feet, we're supposed to pull power, and there wasn't a lot of power left at that point. And we hit really hard, but flat. And then it rolled over on its left side. I was on the left side, and I was kind of stunned at that point, you know. Um, but when I finally, realized, hey, I'm still alive, I need to get out of here. And again, I was laying on the side of the aircraft that was down on the ground, and I looked up, and my co-pilot, he's gone. And I looked in the back, the crewmen, they're gone, and I climb up over the edge and I look out, and they're both standing there about 50 yards away, you know. Um,
They left
and
you? What the?
yeah, I always, give my co-pilot crap that he left his boot mark on my face as he got out.
Uh,
But you know,
that's terrible.
we do, in our briefs, we do brief that if we have, a crash, you know, it's really every man for himself to get out. You have to get yourself out, which, so it sounds bad, but really they did the right thing because,
Yeah.
it, if you can get hurt, you may be hurt, you know, and so luckily, I was okay and I got out. And the funny thing is that the crash was literally about 50 yards from our squadron. So the hangar was right there, and people saw this smoking aircraft. We were the only squadron on the base, so they knew it was ours. And by the time we got out and I was standing there, the entire squadron was running out, to us to see what happened. And the CO at the time, he was out in front, and he gets to me. I was the aircraft commander, and he's like, "What happened?" And I'm like, um, I didn't really know what happened at that point, except that we had a large bang and we were losing power. And when they did the investigation, it turned out when the aircraft had been going through depot level maintenance, not maintenance in our squadron, but higher level maintenance that they do, someone had left 6 inches of safety wire off of the bolts that held the main drive shaft in. And those bolts vibrated off eventually. That's why they have the safety wire to prevent them from, vibrating off. And I was the lucky guy that they came off, and that caused, so when the main drive shaft came off, that was what drove the rotor system. So that's why the engines were running, but the rotor system was no longer being driven. And so it was kind of like a dual engine failure because there was no power. The engines couldn't drive the rotor anymore. But it was not something that was in our, our manual that tells us what to do, our NATOPS manual,
Yeah.
Naval Aviation Training and Operations Procedures and Standardization is NATOPS. There was no emergency for that at that time. It had never happened, wasn't supposed to happen. And so I was glad that it wasn't my fault, So,
Yeah.
and
Heck yeah.
everybody was okay. The air crewman was okay. My co-pilot, uh, they thought I had a broken neck. So when I got to medical, they took x-rays. They thought my neck was broken, and they strapped me in an ambulance and tied me up. I couldn't move. Then they took me downtown, and the doctor reviewed the x-rays and stuff, and he walked in and he goes, "Do you ever play football?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "That's just normal degeneration from playing football. You're okay. You can go home." So, yeah. Yeah. So,
Wow.
yeah. But luckily everybody was okay, and you know, uh but I like to say it changed me as a pilot from then on, because when you're 21 years old and you're a pilot and or an air crewman, you know this, you think you're invincible. Okay.
Absolutely.
You know,
Oh yeah, I
that's
got the invincible card as soon as I graduated swimmer school. Here, you're invincible. Go.
right. Because if you didn't think that, you wouldn't be jumping in the middle of the night into water, with 30-foot seas and doing the rescue that you did if you thought you weren't invincible. I mean,
Yeah.
it it allows us to do stuff, because if you're, worried about that, you can't do it. And so, um, the good news is it made me a different pilot. It made me a better pilot, a safer pilot, because I realized, okay, I'm not invincible. And so I think I was a better pilot for that. I used to say, I wish every pilot could have a crash like that. And of course, we couldn't afford it, but that's why we do simulators,
Right.
because you can screw it up in the simulator, and that, and, that's why you guys do pool training in the water, in the pool, because you can screw it up there and not when you're in the ocean and when it counts. So that's what training allows you to do, is to be able to make the mistakes so that you don't make them when the time comes. Yeah,
Right. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Man, that's two stories in a row where you are just truly blessed to walk away from.
yeah.
Wow.
I only have one left, right? You only get three strikes, so
I don't know.
I
God might look at you and be like, I'm not done with you yet. Let's go,
yeah,
JT.
I only got one. I got one more. I don't know what that is. So yeah,
But let's
yeah.
try not to use it, okay?
Yeah, yeah. That's why, people always say, "Hey, are you flying?" I'm like, "Yeah, nah, I'm not flying. I don't fly anymore." And like, I see these, and unfortunately, we saw this, in New York, that helicopter tour company crashed,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and I always say to people, I'm like, I don't go. I'm like, if I'm not flying it, I'm not going with somebody else flying it. Yeah. So yeah,
I don't blame you.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah, yeah.
Well, since like all the flying time you had throughout the Navy, in your career, I know you had a couple rescues. Do you remember your very first one?
Yeah, the first one again was in the H2. Uh, we were stationed at Mayport, which is on the ocean in Jacksonville, Florida, northern Florida, and we used to stay in SAR duty, because the nearest Coast Guard station was in Savannah, and
Right.
the depending on what their crew maintenance, their ability to maintain crews and things like that. So we didn't stand it. We would stand it when they were off duty for whatever reason. We would pick it up, and the first rescue that we had was a ship that, or a boat that went down off of Jacksonville, Florida, pleasure craft, and standing SAR duty. And we went out there, and um, this one was during the day, so it was relatively simple. You know, they were their boat was gone, but they were in the water, and that was a matter of just putting a crewman in the water because it was day. We you know did it at 10 feet. I heard on your other podcast you were talking about, you know, one of the things that goes back and forth between pilots and aircrew is what is the exact altitude? Because, you know, my 10 feet looks like 20 feet to you back there, you know,
It's how low to get to the
and
water. Uh-huh.
yeah,
Free fall
and it would
deployment
be,
coming your way.
yeah, because, we, we, you know, give the call from the front when we're ready and at the right altitude to jump the swimmer, and you get the three pats there, jump, jump, jump. And, you know, we would practice this. And, you know, I remember a few times in practice where we'd get a call back that says, you know, are you at 15 feet? What's your altitude? You know, because and again, we're up front, we're looking at the radar altimeter, I mean, but it's pretty easy to move up or down 10 feet, because,
Yeah.
I mean, you got wind, you got waves, the radar altimeter's bouncing off the water. So yeah, it could easily be 20 feet and not 10 feet. And, that's a big difference for you guys that are doing it in the back. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
so we put him in, and nobody was injured. It was just getting them back to shore, and that was pretty simple in the grand scheme of rescues. Nothing like your rescue there.
Hey,
So
I enjoy all stories. It doesn't matter how benign people think it is. It's going to save a
yeah.
life, and I love it. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft. As a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station, the PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
But
So,
my favorite SAR story though is, again, uh I was in the 60. Um so I flew H2s, and the 60 Bravo, which is the Seahawk, and I think you were in the Jayhawk, which
correct.
is the 60 for the Coast Guard. The 60 Bravo, I went out to California to learn how to fly that and come back, and we started the training squadron on the East Coast. Um, and it was kind of an interesting process because usually when you're become an instructor, you've been in the fleet, for a tour, and then you go be an instructor. So you got a pretty good amount of time in the aircraft. I didn't have a lot of time in the 60 because I just did the training, and then we had to start the training squadron, and there wasn't enough fleet guys because the aircraft was new to the fleet. So I was instructing people, and I didn't have a lot of time in the aircraft, but we were on a night flight, and the tower called us. We weren't on SAR duty. We were just in the local area, and tower called us, and they said, "We think we have a distress on a small boat." They gave us the location. Can we check it out? So we went up north towards Georgia, towards the Georgia border there, and off the coast, and we were looking for this alleged ship or boat, um, and we're not seeing anything. And then all of a sudden, we see pencil flares going up, and we're like, okay, well,
Wow.
that must be who we're looking for. So we flew over. There was another helicopter. They actually had a wet swimmer on board, so they put their wet swimmer on board. Or they put their wet swimmer in the water, and we were basically working with that wet swimmer and bringing people into our helicopter. And it turned out that the crewman who's on the hoist, he brings them into the cabin, and he says to us, I don't think this is a boat accident because these guys are wearing flight gear.
What the?
Yeah. And we're all, you know, me and the co-pilot were like, why are they wearing flight gear if they're in a boat? Yeah, I mean, we had no clue what was going on, and we picked two more out, and we had three of them. They were all in flight gear, and we got them to Mayport, and they were taken to medical, and we landed, and then the story came out, and what happened was when Tower had called and asked us to look or to search. Um, Another helicopter from a different squadron, they had heard the conversation. It was over tower frequency, and they decided to help, and but they didn't tell anybody that they were doing that. And so they were looking in the area for this boat, um, and they were descending at night, and they got disoriented and flew into the water.
Oh,
And
man.
yeah, and luckily, all three of them got out. They actually pulled the aircraft out of the water um, after the mishap, and they brought it back to the hangar, and it was in pretty good shape. One thing about the 60, it's a tough aircraft,
Yeah.
um, and it was in good shape. But the thing about it was the front of the aircraft, the nose of the aircraft, and same on the Jayhawk. It's got this little like round nose in the front, was gone. The the
Oh,
whole
wow.
f- the whole nose was gone, the windshield was gone. The first thing that you saw was the two pilot seats. That was all. And it turned out that's what probably saved the pilots' lives, because they egressed out of the aircraft pretty easily because the whole nose had snapped off. And
Holy
yeah, they
cow.
just re- and one of the pilots was a friend of mine, and he told, the story that he would tell is that the other guy was flying, and he was putting in the coordinates for the search into the computer and had his head down, and the next thing he knew was there was water in the cabin, and he was like, "Why is there water in the?" I mean, that's how, you know, uh, basically um, disoriented they had become. You know that they
Oh,
they
my
they
gosh.
literally didn't even know that they had flown it into the water. Which again, you know, the one of the big things in my career in flying was we've got three people on this crew. Sometimes we have four, right? Two
Yeah.
pilots and one air crew, or two pilots and two air crew. And one of the big things that I tried to stress was, um, you know, you got to speak up. You got to say something. And
Absolutely.
a lot of times, the the more junior air crewmen, they're reluctant to say something, because you're flying with a more senior officer up front or whatever it may be. And actually, I tell the story in my book that I was on a training flight. We would do our search and rescue training. We had to be current, like I think we had to do a number of search and rescue practice events every 60 days to be current, um, for day and night. And there was one training flight. I was the CO of the training squadron. My co-pilot was a lieutenant that was under training, and I actually had an AW chief, E7 in the back, who we had flown together a lot and knew each other, but we went out off the coast. We dropped our flares and we were doing our approaches at night and doing, following the SAR thing. And I was the guy flying the aircraft, and we're supposed to be in a 60-foot hover. That's where we lower the hoist from at night, was 60 feet. And so we got to a 60-foot hover, and the air crewman was giving us directions to get us on top of the simulated survivor, where the flare was and everything. And as we're doing that, I'm slowly lowering the altitude on purpose. Okay. So we're at
Okay.
50 feet, 40 feet. The reason why I'm doing that is I'm waiting for somebody to say, "Hey, what are you doing? Watch your altitude,"
Yeah.
and nobody's saying anything. Then we're at 20 feet. We're supposed to be at 60, and we're at 20.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And
What a
finally
great training that is.
then we got to 10 feet, and, I pulled up and waved it off, and I'm like, you know, is anybody going to say anything, or are we just going to all die in this aircraft? And it's like total silence, you know, and, we got back and, we sat down and we debriefed it, and they're like, you know, yeah, we screwed up, but you're the skipper and we thought you knew what you were doing. And I'm like, no, I'm like, doesn't matter whether it's the skipper, doesn't matter who's flying. We're supposed to be at 60 feet. We got down to 10 feet and you didn't say anything, you know?
Yeah, that's a problem.
And yeah. And they learned their lesson. I mean, it was a good lesson. And, it's funny because I had a AW1. He became a chief later on my deployment. And of course, one of the big things on our deployment was say something, question,
Yeah.
say why are we doing that, et cetera, et cetera. And so we came back from deployment and we were flying a functional check flight, which is after they do maintenance on the aircraft, you got to test it to make sure it's okay and stuff. And we're over the water and I'm flying with a co-pilot who was not the best co-pilot. And we're flying around and his door flies open. Okay. In flight. Um,
Oh boy.
and this guy's got all sorts of crap on the side of the seat near the door. His lunch, his thermos, his charts, all this stuff. And I'm flying. We were at like, 700 feet. And I'm looking over and watching this guy trying to get the door closed and trying not to have all this stuff fly out, you know. And while I'm watching him, I became totally fixated on what he was doing. And in the meantime, the aircraft is descending, you know, and I didn't even realize it was descending. I had lost situational awareness, and we got to about 400 feet, and my crewman that was part of my crew on deployment, he goes, why are we at 400 feet? And that kind of woke me up to, okay, my job is to fly the aircraft, and this guy's got to figure out how to close his door. But
Yeah.
I gotta fly the aircraft first. And luckily he said that. I mean, I was so you know, that's the problem is you can become fixated on things. And I was so fixated on that, I had lost the awareness. And by him saying that, he snapped me back into it.
That's
So,
awesome.
that's one of the things that people don't understand, especially, guys that are TAC air pilots that fly single engine or single piloted,
Yep.
you know, a crew is a very powerful capability, but if you don't have the right um relationship with the crew to make sure that they are free to comment and to, question, then that's not going to be a good situation. And that's why the Navy and the Coast Guard, we do all those crew coordination classes,
Yeah.
to prevent the fact from, you know uh you know having somebody get in a situation where they don't say something and they end up, you know in the water or worse, because somebody didn't say anything. um And to be honest with you, when you're flying with a crew with 3 or 4 people, you should never be in a situation where you end up in flying into terrain because of loss of awareness of one person. You
Agree.
either you have 2 people to back you up or 3 people, and it should never be because one person, lost their situational awareness. Um, and but it happens. It happened. Through my career, we lost a lot of pilots, and you know, in the Navy, when we're out there and we're doing ship identification in the old days, we didn't have, right now we have the forward-looking infrared devices, FLIR, that
Yep.
you're able to, identify ships, at least what they are, at night, and you don't have to go down. In the old days, if we wanted to identify a ship at night in the Persian Gulf, you'd have to fly and turn on your searchlight, and come up at stern to read the name off the stern, But
Yeah.
that descent at night, a lot of people flew into the water. They
Yeah.
lost awareness and they ended up flying into the water. So the
I
power
am
of the
very
crew.
much on board with the crew and a
Yeah.
full crew. Like everybody's talking on that aircraft, and I've been on both. I've been on aircrafts where everybody's got a voice, and I've been on aircraft where the pilots up front literally shut us off in the back. Like we don't want to hear from you. Like me personally, I'm not even comfortable with that anymore.
Yeah.
Like if I'm
No,
not talking, I will go up and tap you. Like, hey, turn me back on. That's how I roll.
yeah. No,
So
yeah. And again, when I, was a junior pilot and landing on the back again, we landed on back of destroyers and frigates. Um, I like to say anybody can land on an aircraft carrier, but we landed on those, and when we did the approach at night, we didn't have night vision goggles back then, so the approach was very hard. I mean, it was at night, it was just hard. And we would have the air crewman, the pilot was making his calls on lineup and things and altitude, but we would have the air crewman call our closure, you know, how fast we were approaching the ship, and
nice,
he would
nice.
give the closure call. So, there was all 3 people were working to get that aboard the ship, and that was the best way. So,
I love it. And we actually, for me personally, like I still do that, especially if we're doing like a confined area landing or some sort of a just an off airport landing. I'm calling it. Like, hey,
yeah,
I'm under the ground. Yeah, you're clear down. We're not going to hit anything. You keep coming. It's the greatest
yeah,
part about having like eyes underneath the helicopter. You can look around and make sure, hey, I need you to slide right. a rock, a tree, a stump, a this, a that. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
all about helping you
I
guys
mean,
out front. You help me out
no,
in the back all the time. So,
yeah, I mean, it sounds simple, but again, you know, you're dealing, um, you're dealing with, you may have two pilots up front. One of them may be a O5 commander, and another may be a lieutenant commander, and then the guy sitting in the back is a E4,
right.
and he doesn't feel comfortable about saying something. And again, hopefully he's in a squadron where he's taught to not feel uncomfortable, and he feels part of the crew, because if he's not given that encouragement, then that's not a good thing. And again, there's we lost a lot of air crews, unfortunately, that flew into the water at night, um, just trying to go from one altitude to the next. It
Yeah.
just can be very disorienting. And I used to tell the people in my squadron, you don't crash going up. So,
Yeah. True
you know,
statement. Holy
yeah.
smoke.
So
Yeah.
if you're doing night descents over the water, which again, if you're doing a search and rescue, you're going to do a night descent over the water. And so before you can go rescue the guy, you got to get yourself down there safely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, both Navy and Coast Guard search and rescue, have a great record for doing that. And especially, I admire you Coast Guard guys in the conditions that you guys do it in, you know,
Thank you.
in with these, ships that are in horrible weather, uh, you know, lots of people, all these masts and crap coming off the top of the aircraft and in the water. And, it's just pretty amazing how you guys do that. So, you know, I
Well, thank you.
admire the Coast Guard for doing that. We're good in the Navy, but I got to give it to the Coast Guard on search and rescue. If I'm stuck in the water, I want to search and rescue from the Coast Guard. I'll take you
Yes,
guys
sir.
first over the Navy.
Hey, I
So,
won't even tell the Navy you told me that, okay?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
If you want us to fire a missile at somebody, I'll take the Navy. But
right
for
on.
for search and rescue, and it's funny because um, when I used to do counter-narcotics, we would go down to the Caribbean or the Pacific, and in the old days, we were not allowed to shoot at boats that were, they were called go fast boats, and these were the cigarette boats. They were, going full speed from Colombia, usually up to Mexico, carrying drugs. And so we'd fly over them. There wasn't really anything we could do. I remember I was on one counter narcotics, and we flew over, and the guy gave me the finger, because on the boat,
Oh, what a
because
dick.
yeah, we were not allowed to do anything. And our ships that were allowed to do the boarding, they couldn't catch the guy. And but later on, times changed, and uh, we were able to take Coast Guard snipers on board, and they were able to shoot the guy's engine out if they didn't stop. And that changed the whole, scenario of counter narcotics, because, they knew, you know, in fact, they started stopping on their own, because they knew that if they didn't stop, they were probably going to get their engine shot out, because what they would like to do is, if they knew they were caught, they would throw the drugs overboard,
Right.
and they would, you
Yep.
know, and because then we would actually put our swimmers in the water to get a bale of the drugs, because that's what we needed in order to prosecute those guys because they had to get prosecuted for what they were doing, which was, kind of a pain, because you had these guys that were running drugs. Then we had to like take them on board our ship, get them to the nearest place. Usually it was Gitmo. We drop them off at Gitmo. Then they had to be transported to Miami. That's where they were basically, you know, um, put in jail. And then we would get called back down to Miami to testify against them, you know, and but it was a lot of effort and energy, and in the end it turned out, this guy was just some poor guy from Colombia that they had paid, $200 to make the drug run.
Yep.
And you know it wasn't like you were stopping a lot of stuff there. So uh
Right.
yeah, so counter narcotics ops. Yeah.
And I've got some buddies in the Coast Guard that have done it, and they've got some incredible stories that come out
Yeah.
of it. My boy Tony Puglia, my goodness, he's got a great one. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, so that's interesting.
yeah. You actually had another rescue. Speaking of like being underway and in battle groups and stuff, you had a search and rescue mission out of a battle group that kind of went sideways on you. What happened?
Yeah, we were, again, this was in the 60. Um, we were out doing a battle group. I think it was a Com 2X, which is where we practice up before we go on deployment. And uh, a aircraft had gone into the water. At least they thought that. And, you know, whenever there's a SAR, everybody wants to go and be part of that.
All
And
right.
so you had all these helicopters, we had fixed wing P3s, and it got to be dangerous because nobody was in control. And I think eventually they got the guys, um, but it was very dangerous. And it was at night. But what it taught me was, one of the things they teach you in SAR, in your SAR training as a pilot is, you know, one of the first things that has to be established in the search and rescue is who's the on-scene commander. You have to have an
Right.
on-scene commander that is controlling, and you want to, if you're searching, you want to give sectors, altitudes, because you don't want people to end up hitting each other. And uh so again, in Jacksonville, I was standing SAR duty. We got a call that an aircraft went down, um and we were flying out there, and by the time we got out there, there were a number of other aviation assets out there, and it was the same scenario. um Nobody was in control. And so I said, okay, I know what I have to do. So we went up to higher altitude. We were at like 5,000 feet. And I'm like, I'm the on-scene commander, you know, and if you're out here, you need to check in with me, and then I'm gonna assign,
Nice.
yeah, I'll assign you, you know, your sector or whatever. And we were able to do that, keep the separation. They found the guy who had punched out, and everything went fine. But again, in search and rescue, one of the most dangerous things besides putting you guys in the water is um, not flying into another aircraft or asset that's out there
Yeah.
because you don't have good comms, or sometimes they don't even speak the same language if you're dealing with foreign navies and things. So you got to
Yeah.
have that that on-scene commander that, knows who's out there and where are they working and what altitudes they're at, or it can quickly go really bad. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you and I have both seen and heard quite a few of those incidents that have happened.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I'll even throw in like when Hurricane Katrina and some of the other hurricanes that have hit the States, when you have a bee's nest of helicopters coming in, it is incredible when you have an RCC, the command center, really, that just navigates and tells everybody which way to go. And whoa,
Yeah.
it's amazing that nobody gets, like, nothing happens, or very,
Yeah.
very little, I should say. So,
Yeah. Especially everybody wants to get a rescue, so, you know,
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of adrenaline flowing out there. People are trying to do a good job, but, it just has to be managed or else it doesn't work well. Yeah.
Exactly. Man.
But,
We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Precision Aviation Group. Mission critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory, globally 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
yeah, so enough about me. I wanted to make sure that we talked about, what you are, and that is the air crew. Um, you know, uh, the pilots, we're the guys up front, but you know, people don't know a lot about aircrew. And when I describe air crewmen to people that are not familiar, I like to say they're Olympic athletes. They're the smartest people around, and they're hell raisers. You know,
Amen on all three.
yeah. But you don't get,
Especially the last one.
yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing about them. What makes them interesting is that you don't get to have only two out of the three. You have to
No.
get that Hellraiser piece has to be in there because if you're gonna throw a guy out the side of the helicopter into a big ocean, you know, um, and hoist him up and down, you're gonna have to have a guy that is is a bit of a hellraiser. It's just the attitude that they have to have, and so I really admire that, and it has to be managed. Um, you know, we used to always joke, because when we would meet the some of our air crewmen, and they would come to a party or something like that, and they would introduce their girlfriend, whatever, and we would always say, "Why is all of their girlfriends' named Star?" You know, and yeah,
Uh,
'cause
oh,
they
that's
they
great.
they were all strippers. You know what I mean? Um, you know, and the fun one of the funny stories I have, it was unfortunate, but it's definitely funny. When I was the CO, one of the air crewmen who was in a different squadron, he was a second class, an E5. He was checking into the training squadron to be an instructor, and we had flown together. I knew him, I was glad he was coming. He was a great guy, and when he checked in, we would have to, do a drug test, and he failed the drug test for cocaine, you know,
Oh man.
which, you know, that first of all. that's pretty unusual, but it's very unusual for the aircrew, because, you know, obviously if you're aircrew and you get in a mishap, you're going to get a drug test, a blood test. So, you can't mess around with that. And so he failed it for cocaine. And, I was like, oh, because my hands were tied. Once he
Yeah.
failed it, I had to put him through discharge. But I knew the guy and I called him in, and we're sitting there one on one. And I'm like, what the heck? He's
Yeah.
like, Skipper, I'm sorry. He's like, I met this stripper and we went back to her house and she took this little vial of cocaine out and she poured it on her breast and I couldn't resist. And I looked at him and I said, I looked at him and I said, that's one of the best excuses I've heard, but I still can't let you go.
That's
Yeah,
pretty good.
yeah.
It
So,
doesn't give you a pass, but
yeah,
okay, I can understand it.
yeah. But yeah, yeah. So these guys, you air crew, they're quite amazing people. And unfortunately, the story is not commonly known. I wrote a book about it, American Quest, which is the story of a guy who's an air crewman and he then becomes a pilot. But I wanted to make sure that I told that story. And a lot of the stories in there are based on real life things that happened to me. But it's written as a fiction story. Names are changed to protect the innocent, but
Nice.
again, it's about the air crew and the remarkable job that they do, and it's tough. It's a hard job. Uh, Again, the search and rescue is hard, but when you're dealing with in the Navy helicopters, uh, complicated systems for radar, ESM systems that detect the signals from bad guys, and acoustics for submarine. And that's the same guy in that back seat doing all that, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
And,
You guys have a
and then
lot.
and then he has to strap on a wetsuit, you know, and a mask and fins and jump out. And, you know, he's Superman, you know. First he's a nerd sitting in the back, and then he becomes Superman, and he's in the water. And, there's not a lot of people that can do that. I don't care whether you went to
Sure.
college or not. Um, you know, and when I was in charge of the training squadron and we were training the air crewmen, um, a lot of them had trouble with the academics. They struggled with, because these were complicated things about understanding radar theory and then working the equipment. And a lot of my senior air crewmen, the AWs, we'd have a guy that was having trouble, and they were like, yeah, we need to get rid of him. And I'm like, hey, let's give him a little more time. He'll be okay. Well, you know,
Yeah.
because, they had a very short leash that they were willing to go, because, they were trying to keep the standard high. And I understood that. But on
Yep.
the other hand, I also understood that, these guys, they're it's a hard thing for them to go through, and some of them needed some extra time. And most of the guys that we got extra time for, they did well, and they went out and went to the fleet. And you know but yeah, it's a hard road for them to do that. And but when you have a very experienced guy in the back, um, you know, that's it's like having 10 guys back there,
Yeah.
because they're so good. And on the other hand, if they're not good, then that can also be, you know, because I've had a few air crewmen, not many, but that, you know, when they opened the door back there and we were deploying swimmers and stuff like that, um, you know, you're a little bit worried. You want to make
Right.
sure that they know what they're doing, and because they're in their gunner's belts, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. And like I said, most of them, almost all of them, are fantastic, but if you don't have one that's having trouble, then you got to really get that early and make sure that they are not put in a position where they can get somebody hurt,
Right.
because you guys are depending on each other. You talked a lot about your hoist operators. Our guys
Oh
are,
yeah.
you know, they're we don't have a special designation for a hoist operator. I think your guy is in the Coast Guard is what is he, a
Flight mechanic.
flight mechanic
So
for.
yeah, there are three like rates in the Coast Guard, which are jobs. So you've got your AMT, your aviation maintenance technician. He's the one that's cranking wrenches mostly. Your AET, your aviation electronic technician. He's doing all your wires and stuff. And then AST, that's us guys in the back that jump out of the helicopter. That's all the life support equipment that we handle. So those are your main three. But your AMTs and AETs, they're the ones that are doing the hoist. So they become flight mechanics, flight mechs.
Yeah. So in the Navy, we've got the AW, aviation, warfare operator. Um, and those guys are, you got to be a wet swimmer.
Yeah.
Because we've got aircrew in the Navy that fly in P3s or P8s now, and they're not wet swimmers, but they're aircrew, they're AWs. Um, but the two guys, if we're in a rescue, the guy in the hoist is a swimmer. It just depends on which one's in his wetsuit, and they're
Yeah.
both, capable of doing that. Um, so, they both are trained for that.
Yeah. Which I think is great. So I am currently a hoist operator, and I can do everything kind of in between as well. I mean, my passion is being on the hook as a crew member, like in a rescue swimmer. That is like my love. But man, I really enjoy hoist operations and being the hoist operator in the back of an aircraft. And I think it's great to be able to go back and forth. So props to the Navy for being able to train their guys to go back and forth with that. I think it's a great move. So
Yeah. Well, they're always fighting over because they all want to be the wet guy, so,
that's because it's the most fun.
yeah, they want to be the guy going into the water. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but again, it's in the so in the Jayhawk, does the hoist operator have the control of the aircraft back there? Does he have a
Yes,
stick back
they
there?
can. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't do
It's
it
a
much though, right?
no, and I will give you my personal take on like the hoist operators control. Like they have it in a couple different aircrafts, and if I remember correctly, the 860, like it's a slow moving. It doesn't go more than maybe 10 knots off the top of my
Yeah,
head. It's been a hot minute. There are some of the bigger aircrafts that can get up to almost 25 and 30 knots. But for me, you guys, I believe that you as a pilot can fly better, faster, and more accurate than I can as the guy in the back. Like I'm pushing buttons, but I don't see the little coolie hat moving. I don't see the director like you guys do up front
right.
in your controls. so I don't see it. So I'm going all by feel, and if I bump too many, or I like you guys just flying. That's my personal thing. It's easier for me to just tell you where I need you to go, and you guys just do it, and I make adjustments based on that. That's my take. So I know
Yeah.
guys do it.
No. Yeah, we would practice it, but generally in real life, we don't usually do it because, like you said, a good crewman, you know, he'll give you the exact, easy right, hold, easy forward, and he'll get you right where you want to be.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's part of practice and crew coordination, to be able to do that. So, yeah, but
So
yeah, the air crewmen, they're a unique breed, and unfortunately, I don't think they get a lot of credit for what they do. In fact, when I was in charge of the training squadron, um, which was HSL 40 in Mayport, so we would get the air crewmen, and they would go through the training on how to be an air crewman in the 60, all the weapon systems, SAR, everything like that. And the they would get their wings, their air crew wings,
yeah,
at the end of that, and then they would go to their squadron. And so when I took over the training squadron, I was like, okay, what are we doing for a ceremony for these guys getting their wings? You know, and turned out there was really no ceremony. And I'm like, that's bullshit. I mean, getting those wings is a big deal.
yeah,
And so, I changed that, and, we invited their parents, whoever, and we made it a big ceremony, because, getting those wings, that, they had gone through a lot to get to that point. They were finally going to
yeah,
go to the fleet, but they had gone through air crew school, rescue swimmer school, and now they had finished the fleet replacement squadron school, and now they're finally getting their wings. And unfortunately, they weren't given the recognition, but we changed that, and I think today they're still doing it. It's a big deal. It's a big ceremony for them to get their wings. So
as it, I believe it should be. It is a
yeah,
lot of work to get there. Like for me personally, I did not earn my wings until I was like fully qualified as a rescue swimmer, like totally done. And that meant graduating swimmer school. Congratulations, you get promoted. You make E4. Then you get on the helicopter. You go through all your basic aircrew stuff, and then you get through the swimmer stuff. That's when you get pinned aircrew. That's when you get your wings. It was a moment. Like you worked hard for those friggin' things. Hell
yeah,
yeah.
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 Did they,
So
did they have a ceremony for that?
So for us, we did. I was in Kodiak, Alaska when I got qualified. It was like quarterly. So hey, congratulations, and they would call you up and officially
Hmm.
pin on the wings. But you got the
Yeah,
memo before that. You're like, hey, here are your wings, good job. And then like a month
right.
later, like, all right, celebrate, woo, pin
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
them.
yeah.
But
So,
it means a lot. As a matter of fact, I'll even throw this out. While I was in Kodiak, we had what's known as the Albatross, and the Albatross was the oldest aircrew member in the Coast Guard, and he was pinning the youngest guys that were just getting qualified. So it was
oh
kind of
wow.
a unique experience. Yeah, so it was cool to see.
Yeah,
But
yeah. It's
um,
funny because I was talking to you about one of the things that we would do is the swimmers, the air crew swimmers, they would go and they would do their pool training, and uh, they had to do that, monthly or whatever. But I would set up that we would do pilots versus air crew in the pool for water polo. And so,
so fun.
you know, I remember one game, I was the CO, and this one of our new air crewmen, he was a E4 third class. and he got the ball, and I just pummeled him. I mean, I pounded him and got him underwater, and he finally released the ball, you know, and so then a few minutes later, I get the ball, and he's right in front of me, and he's not doing anything. He's not coming after me because I'm the CO, you know. And he- he's a new guy, and he's an E4, and the Chiefs, are screaming at him, pound him, and he's like looking back at them, and he's like, but pound him, and finally he jumps on me, grabs me, throws me underwater, and I had to let go of the ball, and I come up, and he's like all worried, and I'm like, that's what we want you to do.
I
Yeah. Yeah,
love it.
yeah. But it was so funny that I got the ball and he was just staring at me. They're all yelling at him, "Get him!" Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. We had
That's
some
great.
really heavy blows thrown, but we'd have a beer afterward and everything would be good. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's fantastic.
gave the chance for the air crewmen. My whole reason for doing it was mainly to give the air crewmen a chance to kind of pound on the pilots, you know, for busting their balls all the time. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
funny.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I'll tell you, as an air crewman, I want to say thank you for that. That's very thoughtful. I appreciate it. All right.
yeah.
And I'm sorry for all the trouble that I or we cause you as the
Hey,
CO.
like I said, it's like Reese's peanut butter cup. You got to get the chocolate and the peanut butter, and the chocolate is being heroes. The peanut butter is, being a hellraiser. You can't separate the two. So thank
Nope.
you for all that you have done, all your Coast Guard air crewmen, Navy air crewmen, your story that I heard, unbelievable courage. And you know something, uh, that happens every day in the fleet, right? I
Yes,
mean,
sir.
there are guys out there, doing the same thing that you did. Sometimes it's not as dramatic, but they're still putting their butt out there, and doing what needs to be done and helping people or protecting the country. And so thank you for doing that. And I hope that, people will watch your show and become more familiar with the guys that are in the back that are doing the work.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate the ride, just getting us to where we need to be.
Well, that's all we're there for. We're just taxi drivers.
Well, that's the rumor, right up until you want to yell
Yeah.
at me later for being a
Yeah.
Hellraiser.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Quick, get to the skipper's office. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
skipper.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, that's funny.
again, we had a big, we had a big cushion for the guys that were there, and we knew that there was, they were gonna do their stuff as long as they didn't get in big trouble. We kind of looked the other way. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Right on. Well, GT, thank you so much for coming on and joining me today. I got one more question for you before I let you go. And I like to ask this question about a piece of advice, right? And you had an amazing career, 27 years in the Navy, active duty, and then another 15 years as a civilian. With everything you've been through, what is a piece of advice that you would pass on to everybody doing the job?
Well, I like to answer that question by saying a saying that I like to say, and that is, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And
Oh,
what that means is, you know, if no matter how good you are, no matter how much experience, no matter how senior you are, if you're not open to learning, you're not going to be the best that you can be. And again, the fact is if you no matter how good you get, if you're open to learning and you realize, you know, just like the saying is, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. I think that that is the biggest piece of advice, because sooner or later, the junior guy is going to be the senior guy, you know, and once they think they know it all, that's when things aren't good. If you're still open to learning and saying, yeah, I didn't know that. I need to know that better or whatever, they're gonna do they're gonna do better. So
That's good stuff. Wow. Thank you so much for that one.
yeah.
I'll
And
tell you what, GT. Oh, yep, go ahead.
the last thing I'll leave you with, and it's in my book, but the saying that I adopted is and I use it for my toasts whenever I'm having a libation there, and that is the saying uh hoka hey. And what that is Crazy Horse, the Indian chief, when they were sitting on the hill getting ready to attack the army, um, their their war cry was "Hoka Hey," which, depending on who you read, either means "Let's go do it" or "Today is a good day to die." So either one, but I like to say, and I'll say to you, "Hoka Hey, my friend. Thank you for your service."
Okay. Thank you for
Hoka Hey.
yours.
Yeah.
Right on. GT, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolute pleasure. For everybody out there, go check out American Quest, written by this man right here. I will have it up. You guys get to see it. And GT, when I get near you, I'm calling you for a beer or a whiskey.
Hey, I'm in the west of San Francisco, the Bay Area. If you get out
All
this
right.
way, definitely give me a call. I'm buying.
Oh, I'm booking plane tickets right now if I know
There
that.
you go. Let me know.
I will catch you later. And again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Be safe, my friend.
Yes, sir. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.
Go.
Now, it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at the Real ResQ. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real ResQ Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft. As a fully integrated system, or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station, the PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission. Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory, globally 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
And
Switlick. No mission is the same. Why should your suit be? Introducing a new custom dry suit experience. Choose your fabric, colors, neck and wrist seals, zippers, pockets, collars, and so much more. Intelligent measuring prompts ensure the most tailored fit. Brought to you by Switlick Survival Products. For more information, visit us at www.switlick.com.
what is the funniest thing that you ever had happen or you saw at your unit during training, like a training fight?
Um, Actually, I think the funniest thing, it wasn't during a training flight, but when I was the CEO of the training squadron, the pilots and air crew, we would we ran a beer stand at the Jacksonville Jaguars, the football team at the stadium. Okay. And
Okay.
the reason for the beer stand, uh the stadium would let, nonprofit organizations run the stand, and then you would get 10% of whatever the stand took in. And of course
Nice.
they didn't have to pay anybody. So that was a good deal for them, and it was a good deal for us because we would take that money and we put it into our morale, welfare, and recreation fund for the squadron. So, we this stand was a big stand. I mean, it had like 10 taps for beer, sold hot dogs, it was your typical stadium thing, and we ran it. And of course, my air crewmen, being air crewmen that they are, the way that the way that they knew how much beer we were selling was by how many cups went out of the stand. So in the beginning of when we opened the stand, they would inventory the cups. We'd have like 1,000 cups, and then when we closed the stand, if we only had 500 cups, that meant we sold 500 beers, and that's how much money they expected that would be in there, and that was the way they kept track. Well, this is Jacksonville, Florida, so all the rednecks would come back to the stand and they'd be carrying their cup, and they go, "Can I get a refill?" Well, my air crewman didn't take them long to say, "Okay, yeah, we'll give you a refill for half price." So the guy would come up, instead of charging them $10 for the beer, they'd only charge $5, and they'd take his cup and refill it. Well, because we weren't giving him a cup, the stadium was not able to track that money was coming in. So they would take the guy's money and they would throw it in a box and they would call it tips. And at at the end of the day, that they would take that money, and they didn't keep it. They gave it to the squadron for MWR. But in the beginning, they were only making, $100 to $200. And then what happened was our beer stand became very popular, okay? Because people started to talk and find out that they could get refills for half price. And so then there started to be a line at our stand, and we were pulling in hundreds of dollars in tips. So finally they ran a sting on the operation, and they caught, that we were doing that. And you know i I had worked in the stand, I knew what was going on, you know and then they told me they got caught, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get fired, you know I'm gonna get in trouble for this. And the stadium, they were all pissed off. And anyway, we had to give him a lot of patches and caps to get at to get out of that one. But we did get out of it, and we didn't take any tips anymore. But again, the their heart was in the right place because they were making money for MWR. And actually, the bottom line of the whole story is we had a senior chief in our squadron, and her sister was arrested, uh, and this senior chief was had to take these four children from her sister, and they didn't have clothes, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, we took all the money that we made from that, we gave it to her, you know, and
Wow.
to help her out, And I told the guys in the stadium that's what the money went to. They didn't care. They're like, yeah, yeah, you're not allowed to sell beer for half price. And we're like, okay, we got it. But their heart was in the right place again.
It's
So
pretty funny.
yeah,
You
yeah,
put an
yeah,
aircrew in charge of something. You know,
yeah,
hey, I
yeah,
gotta find a way.
yeah, yeah. But
Oh, that's great.
their heart was in the right place, and it was good while it lasted. But we stopped it. So yeah, that's I think my funny story for that.